Ever since first learning of its existence in A Realm Reborn, the Rejoining phenomenon has been a central plot event in the story of Final Fantasy XIV. With the demise of the Ascians as we know them, we can be reasonably assured that no future Rejoinings will occur. However, if you take into account the mechanics behind the phenomenon, we can't really be sure another won't happen. There also seems to be certain aspects of rejoining that are not fully understood. Likely only an Ascian or Hydaelyn could have answered them. But we'll endeavour to put all their pieces into place, and explore how the Rejoinings work.
Zodiark longeth to be made whole. For his restoration, for his resurrection, his servants labour without cease. They seek to tear down the barriers which surround the source. Thus do they rejoice in their ardour, in your calamities, for each marks a rejoining. Seven times have they succeeded. 7 times hath the darkness grown stronger. 7 times have I failed.
A Rejoining, also called the Ardour by the Ascians and known to the people of Aetheris as an umbral calamity, is the process where one of the reflection worlds merges to become one with the source. The result of such a rejoining is the loss of all life on that reflection. These living creatures are merged into the etheric flow of the source, resulting in the souls of said beings merging with those on Aetheris. Zodiark's primary form also regains a portion of his being, for the moon of the source and the moon of a reflection each contain a piece of his form. The planetary body of a reflection in question also merges with the source. What happens with structures in that world is not fully known, but it's speculated some would appear on Aetheris. However, this is pure speculation, as we have seen no evidence of such. As a result, the current conclusion is said reflections transforms into energy that becomes a part of the source. The reason these rejoinings happen is because of the Ascians, who sought to reform Zodiark. According to their design, once the last reflection is rejoined, Zodiark would be made whole and reawaken, and he and Hydaelyn would continue their battle anew. Now then, let's go into depth about how a rejoining works.
In sundering the star did we cry out, and the barriers twixt planes chanced to falter. Across 10 and 3 were we then divided, reflections of the source, each possessed of a shard.
When Aetheris was originally sundered, a great barrier was created, separating all 14 stars from each other. It's these barriers that allows the reflections to be dimensionally separate. The nature of where each reflection is located is still a topic of discussion. There are 2 primary theories. The first is that the reflections are relatively close to each other, arranged in a circular pattern. Because of the barriers, they cannot see or interact with each other, thus why they cannot be seen in the night sky of Aetheris. And this is usually how the reflections are depicted in game, like within the oculus of the Crystal Tower. That alone lends much weight to this theory. The second theory is that both source and reflections occupy the same location in space, but are dimensionally separate due to the barrier, thus being out of phase with one another. Both theories have their valid points, but given the depictions of the reflections in the story and written in official media, the first theory would seem to be the correct one. Regardless, these barriers exist, and the Ascians studied them carefully as they laboured to restore Aetheris to its unsundered state. It's because of the Ascians that we have much more understanding about the Rejoinings, both due to their successes but also their failures. Let's talk about their failure first, which led to their future successes.
We took it upon ourselves to rejoin the worlds. But in our eagerness and, I confess, our ignorance, we erred and made a useless void of the 13th.
The original Ascian plan was if the elemental aspect of a reflection was tilted out of balance, said reflection would eventually merge with the source. The reason for this theory is they noted that despite the barrier, the reflections had a connection to the source, one in which etheric energy flowed between them. We ourselves utilised this flow to travel to other reflections. They began trying to force the 13 to rejoin with the Source by pushing his elemental aspect towards darkness. To do this, they instigated war and chaos upon the star, and allowed the process to take its course. The 13th eventually became heavily aspected to darkness, and while its aether did flow onto the Source like a small stream, the Ascians sought to open the floodgates. For whatever reason, they figured killing the Watcher and releasing the fragment of Zodiac on the moon of the 13th would cause the rejoining to occur. So they manipulated Golbez to slay the Watcher, he who maintains the shackles of Zodiac's prison. With the fall of the Watcher, the elemental imbalance spiraled out of control. No rejoining would occur, however, due to the barrier around the Source. The overwhelming darkness of the 13th had nowhere to flow to. Thus did it fester and consume the 13th reflection, resulting in the creation of the Void. The entire endeavour was a failure, and though Zodiac's fragment remained, the 13th was now unsuitable for rejoining.
It was only afterwards that we discovered a connection twixt source and shard, a flow of energy that maintains elemental balance. And thus did we arrive at our time-honored modus operandi.
As the 13th became aspected in darkness, dark aspected aether did flow to the Source as they calculated. But they failed to account for the barrier around the Source, which stemmed the flow to a stream, regardless of the levels of aether. They learned two things from this experience, which would be the keys to triggering a successful rejoining. Now we go into the full process, and what was required to make it all happen. The first step was to introduce an elemental imbalance to one of the reflections, like they had done with the 13th. They wouldn't pick any random element either, rather one that was necessary for later on in the process. Let's take the rejoining we are most familiar with as an example, the 7th Umbral Calamity. The Ascians travelled to the 7th reflection and fostered an elemental imbalance. They would allow this imbalance to grow on its own, but ensured it didn't spiral out of control like last time. At a certain point, aspected aether would begin to flow from the 7th onto the Source, connecting both stars. This was the sign the Ascians waited for, in order to begin the next stage of their plan. They would need to weaken the barrier around the Source. This would cause the rejoining to happen naturally all on its own. How the Ascians weakened the barrier was via a great calamity on the Source, one powerful enough to create a breach. However, they couldn't just cause any calamity. Rather, it needed to be a matching element to the current aspect of the 7th. The 7th reflection was unaspected, but in a heightened elemental state with all of the elements. But the key was these elements were astral in nature. This is the important part. What you see on screen are the basic elements of the FF14 universe. Lightning, fire, earth, ice, water, and wind. Then you have the opposing forces of light and dark. Importantly, however, is each of these elements has two states. Astral, meaning passive, and umbral, meaning active. Take the element of water as an example. Most of the time, water is in an astral passive state, like in a lake or sea. But if it's in the form of a flood or tidal wave, for example, it's in an umbral active state. Lightning is another example. By nature, it's mostly in an umbral active state, but it can also exist in an astral passive state. All of the elements in the FF14 universe exist either in an active or a passive state. What this means is if the Ascians were to trigger a calamity to weaken the barrier, if the element of the calamity and that of the reflection don't line up, the rejoining will fail. In the case of the 7th Umbral Calamity, this was the fall of Dalamud and destruction wrought by the Elder Primal Bahamut. This was enough to weaken the barrier, and as the 7th was in an unaspected active state, all the Ascians needed was an unaspected calamity, which is what Bahamut delivered, well known throughout the series as a non-elemental being. Once this breach was created, the etheric stream from the 7th became a flood, with the entirety of this star flowing as energy onto the Source, carrying the souls of all living beings and the fragment of Zodiac along with it. As we know, the Ascians achieved 7 rejoinings, but we stopped their attempt at an 8th. With the Ascians now gone, no more rejoining shall be forcibly progressed. I say forcibly because there is always a chance one could happen by accident, or mere chance if the right conditions are met. Let's take the 1st and 9th reflections as examples. Both of these stars are elementally imbalanced, the 1st with passive light and the 9th with active lightning. Let's say for example that at some point in the future another calamity happens on the source, be it a natural disaster or something man-made. This could cause the barrier around the source to again weaken, and if this calamity matched its elemental aspect, one of these reflections could under the right conditions rejoin to the source. And this would happen all on its own, as the reflections seem almost naturally predisposed to rejoin. The one thing we don't understand however is why this disposition exists. Be aware I'm in full theory mode now. Here's a few theories I came up with. Number 1. The reflections are naturally predisposed as they were once a singular whole. It's possible that there's a force between them, always trying to pull them back together, forming ancient Aetherius. The only thing preventing this is the barriers which Hydaelyn herself created, possibly because she saw this disposition. Number 2. It's a side effect of the sundering process. Nothing like the sundering had ever been attempted before, so who knows what laws of nature were created and destroyed in the process. Number 3. A theory I personally put more stock in. Zodiac was the key to the Rejoinings all along. Zodiac was a massive being that was split into 14 fragments, all of which were sealed within the moon of each reflection. As each rejoining happened, his form became more and more complete. As the former will of Aetherius made manifest, what if it was the pieces of Zodiac himself that were pulling the reflections and source together? Hydaelyn recognized this and erected the barrier. She couldn't hamper Zodiac any more than she already had however, as his presence is maintaining the etheric shield around these stars, the very one keeping out the Song of Oblivion. It's also possible that the etheric shield was responsible, as it protected and encompassed the source and reflections. When Zodiac was destroyed on the source, his remaining fragments on the other reflections dispersed into Aether, releasing the ancient souls into the ethereal sea. His demise thus ended any future chance of a rejoining. And there we have it, a full explanation of the process of rejoining, along with my own personal theories. As you just heard, there are still some aspects of a rejoining that we don't fully understand, and until we do, the future will always be in doubt. If the Ascians do appear one day, will they still be set upon their course of performing a rejoining now that Zodiac is gone? And then there's also the matter of souls. As has been noted in recent years, the souls of those living on the source are denser than those on the reflections as a result of rejoinings. At first we took this at face value, until we learned in Endwalker and Dawntrail that souls in memory are a much more complex subject. A question maybe for another video. A future rejoining, one that occurs naturally, by accident or by design, could be a great setting for a future expansion. I for one firmly believe we will see them again in the future, possibly even in this expansion, as the fate of the 9th reflection still hangs in the balance. All it would take is the right calamity.